A homeless Navy SEAL followed his dog into the jungle and found a ship that should never exist, still alive inside. A homeless Navy SEAL found a cruise ship lost in the jungle. His dog found a hidden fortune. Caleb Walker had nothing left but silence and a loyal K9. Until one night, that silence broke. Deep in a forgotten jungle, something impossible waited, watching, breathing, and hiding a truth powerful enough to kill for. Comment 1 if you believe the truth should always come out, or 0 if some secrets should stay buried, and tell us where you're watching from. The road ended where the pavement cracked into dirt, and the dirt faded into swamp. Most people turned around long before that point. Caleb Walker didn't. He stood at the edge of the tree line, boots half sunk in wet sand, staring into the thick wall of green that swallowed everything beyond it. The Florida air clung to his skin, heavy and unmoving, thick with the smell of salt, rot, and something older, something buried. Beside him, Shadow stood alert. The German shepherd's ears were forward, body rigid, amber eyes fixed on the darkness between the trees. He didn't bark. He didn't move. He just watched. Caleb exhaled slowly, running a rough hand through his unkempt hair. Weeks without a mirror had left him looking like a ghost of himself. Beard overgrown, clothes worn thin, skin marked by sun and silence. Once he had worn a uniform. Once people had called him Chief. Now they called him something else. Crazy vet. Mountain drifter. Guy who talks to his dog like it talks back. Caleb didn't correct them. It was easier that way. Behind him, far down the dirt road, the faint hum of a pickup truck faded into nothing. The last sign of the small coastal town he avoided unless he had no other choice. People there looked at him like he carried something contagious. Maybe he did. Memories had a way of spreading, the kind that didn't fade, the kind that came back in flashes, loud, sharp, and without warning. A sound, a smell, a moment where the world shifted, and suddenly he wasn't standing in a Florida swamp anymore. He was somewhere else. Dust in the air, heat pressing down, voices over comms. Then, the blast. Caleb blinked hard, jaw tightening. Not now, he muttered under his breath. Shadow's head turned slightly, just enough to glance at him. Always watching. Always there. Caleb reached down and rested a hand on the dog's neck, fingers brushing through the thick fur. The contact grounded him, pulled him back into the present. "You're good," he said quietly. "We're good." Shadow didn't relax. If anything, the dog stiffened even more. Then it happened. A low, sharp growl rolled out of Shadow's chest. Not loud, not wild, controlled, focused. Caleb froze. That wasn't nothing. Shadow had been trained for combat zones, not empty forests. He didn't react unless there was something to react to. Slowly, Caleb lifted his eyes back toward the jungle. At first, it looked the same. Dense trees, hanging vines, layers of shadow where sunlight couldn't reach. But then something shifted. Not movement exactly. More like absence. Like the jungle itself was holding its breath. No birds, no insects, no wind. Just silence. Caleb's instincts stirred, old habits rising to the surface like they had never left. His posture straightened, shoulders tightening, eyes narrowing as he scanned the tree line. "All right," he murmured. "What are you seeing?" Shadow stepped forward. One step, then another. The growl deepened. Caleb didn't stop him this time. He followed. The ground changed beneath his boots as they crossed into the jungle. Softer, damp, each step sinking slightly, leaving no clear track behind. The air cooled just enough to feel unnatural, like stepping into a place untouched by time. Branches brushed against his arms, vines tugged at his sleeves. The deeper they moved, the darker it became. and still, nothing made a sound. Caleb swallowed, forcing his breathing to stay steady. This wasn't just wilderness. It felt wrong. Shadow suddenly stopped, hard. His entire body locked in place, muscles coiled, ears pinned forward. Then he barked. Once, sharp, loud, echoing through the trees like a gunshot. Caleb's heart kicked hard against his ribs. Easy, he whispered, dropping into a half-crouch without thinking. Easy, Shadow. What is it? The dog didn't look at him. He stared straight ahead. Caleb followed his gaze. At first, he saw nothing. Just layers of green and shadow and tangled growth. Then, a shape. So faint it could have been imagined. Straight lines where there shouldn't be any. Angles that didn't belong in nature. Caleb blinked, leaning slightly to get a better view. The shape didn't disappear. If anything, it became clearer. Something was out there. Something big. Something man-made. Shadow let out another low growl. Caleb felt it then. Not fear. Not yet. Something else. Recognition. The same feeling he used to get before a mission went sideways, before things stopped making sense, before everything went wrong. He exhaled slowly. Yeah, he said under his breath, eyes locked on the distant shape. I see it too. Behind them, the world they came from felt miles away. Ahead of them, something waited, and for the first time in a long time, Caleb Walker felt it. Not the weight of the past, not the numb silence he had been living in, but something sharper, something pulling him forward. Shadow took another step. Caleb followed, and neither of them looked back. The jungle closed behind them, like a door that had been waiting to shut. Branches shifted into place. Vines swayed once, then stilled. The last trace of the outside world, the road, the wind, even the distant hum of civilization, disappeared as if it had never existed. Shadow moved ahead with purpose now. No hesitation, no uncertainty. Whatever he had sensed, he was tracking it. Caleb stayed close, eyes scanning constantly, instincts sharpening with every step. The old training came back in pieces, not clean, not steady, but enough. Watch the ground, watch the canopy, listen between the silence, especially the silence, because this kind of silence wasn't natural. Even in the deepest wilderness, something always made noise. Birds, bugs, the distant shift of something unseen. Here, there was nothing. Only the sound of their own movement. Boots pressing into damp soil. Leaves brushing against fabric. Shadow's steady breathing. Caleb didn't like it. Too quiet, he muttered. Shadow didn't respond, but his ears twitched. They moved deeper. The light thinned as the canopy thickened overhead. What little sun managed to break through came down in narrow beams, cutting through the air like pale knives. Dust and moisture hung suspended in those beams, unmoving. Time felt strange here, like it had slowed down, or been forgotten entirely. Caleb checked his watch out of habit. Dead. The screen was blank. He frowned, tapping it once, then twice. Nothing. Figures, he said under his breath. Shadow stopped again. Not as abruptly as before. This time it was more subtle. A shift in posture. A pause. His nose lifted slightly, testing the air. Then he turned, not forward, but slightly to the left, and began moving in that direction. Caleb hesitated. Shadow, he called softly. The dog didn't stop. Caleb exhaled, glancing around once more before following. The terrain changed as they moved. The ground rose slightly, becoming firmer, less swamp and more packed earth. Roots twisted across the surface like veins, forcing careful steps. Then, a voice. Hey! Caleb froze. It came from behind him. Distant, faint, human. He turned slowly, eyes narrowing toward the direction they had come from. Nothing but trees. Then again, Walker. That one was clearer. Caleb's chest tightened. He knew that voice. He hadn't heard it in years. Sergeant Mason Reed, dead for 5. Caleb's breath hitched. No, not real. Not here. Stay with me, he whispered to himself, pressing his fingers briefly against his temple. Stay here. Shadow was already moving again. Forward, ignoring the voice completely. Caleb stared into the trees one last second, the echo of that call lingering in his ears. Then he turned back and followed the dog. The voice didn't come again. They pushed on for what felt like hours. The air grew heavier, thicker, and then, slowly, something changed. A smell. Faint at first. Metal. Not rust, exactly. Cleaner than that. Sharpened. Artificial. Caleb slowed. You smell that? He asked. Shadow didn't look back, but his pace quickened. The trees began to thin. Not completely, just enough to allow more light through. And with the light came something else. Space. The jungle opened slightly, forming a natural corridor of sorts, though no trail marked it. Caleb's pulse began to rise. This wasn't random. Something had pushed this place open, something big. They stepped through the last line of dense brush, and Caleb stopped dead. For a moment, his mind refused to process what he was seeing. It didn't fit. Didn't belong. Didn't make sense. At first, it looked like a cliff, a wall of dark metal rising above the trees. But cliffs didn't have straight edges. Cliffs didn't have windows. Cliffs didn't have railings twisted and broken, half swallowed by vines. Caleb took a step forward, eyes wide, breath shallow. No way, he whispered. Shadow stood beside him, silent now. The massive structure loomed ahead, partially hidden by the jungle, but unmistakable. Steel, paint long gone, surfaces eaten by time, but still standing, still intact. Caleb moved closer, drawn by something he couldn't explain. With each step, more details came into focus. Rows of darkened windows, balconies bent inward, sections of hull embedded into the earth, as if the land had risen up around it, or it had sunk down into the jungle itself. Caleb's throat went dry. This isn't possible. He circled slowly, boots crunching against debris that didn't belong in a forest. Metal fragments, shattered glass, pieces of something that had once been polished and human-made. Shadow walked ahead, nose low, tracing the ground. Then Caleb saw it. Faint, half covered in grime and creeping moss. Letters, large ones, worn down but still there. He stepped closer, reaching out instinctively to brush away some of the dirt with his hand. The metal beneath was cold, colder than it should have been. The name revealed itself piece by piece. A-U-R. Caleb leaned in, clearing more. Aurora, he read quietly. Then the rest. Star. He stepped back, staring up at the impossible structure. A cruise ship. A full-sized cruise ship. Miles from the ocean. Buried in the heart of a Florida jungle. Shadow let out a low, uneasy whine. Caleb didn't move. Didn't speak. His mind raced, trying to find logic, explanation, anything that could make sense of what stood in front of him. But there was nothing. No crash site. No destruction. No reason. Just a ship. Where no ship should ever be. A faint breeze stirred through the clearing, for the first time since they entered the jungle. It brushed against Caleb's face, then passed. And with it, a sound. So low he almost missed it. A hum. Deep. Steady. and coming from somewhere inside the ship. Caleb's eyes narrowed. Shadow's ears snapped forward. They both heard it. And whatever this place was, it wasn't dead. The hum pulsed again, low, steady, deep enough to feel more than hear. Caleb stood motionless at the edge of the clearing, his eyes locked on the towering hull of the Aurora star. The jungle around it seemed to lean away, as if even nature itself refused to touch whatever this ship had become. Shadow shifted beside him, paws pressing into the damp earth, muscles tense. He wasn't growling anymore. That was worse. When Shadow stopped growling, it meant he had moved past warning and into calculation. Caleb swallowed slowly, forcing his breathing to stay even. "All right," he murmured. "We're not rushing this." He stepped forward. Every instinct told him to turn around, walk back the way they came, leave this place to rot under the vines and silence. But instinct had lied to him before. Instinct had told him to trust command. Instinct had told him the mission would hold. He exhaled sharply. Not this time. The ground shifted under his boots as he moved closer, transitioning from soft jungle soil to something harder. Packed debris, bits of rusted metal, fragments of glass buried just beneath the surface. This wasn't a crash site. There were no impact scars, no torn earth, no broken trees. The ship hadn't fallen here. It had been placed. Caleb's jaw tightened at the thought. Shadow moved ahead, circling slowly, nose low, mapping the perimeter in wide arcs. His path wasn't random. He was tracking patterns, checking for entry points, scent trails, anything that didn't belong. Caleb followed the curve of the hull, running his eyes along its length. It was massive, bigger than it had looked from a distance. The side of the ship rose like a steel wall, stretching far beyond what the jungle should have been able to hide. Sections of it were embedded deep into the ground, swallowed by layers of dirt and creeping roots. It looked less like it had landed, and more like the earth had grown up around it. A staircase came into view. Metal bent, half collapsed, but still attached to what had once been an access point along the side of the ship. Caleb stopped at the base of it. The steps creaked slightly in the breeze, or maybe that was just the metal settling. Shadow approached first. He sniffed the bottom step, then moved up one. Paused. Listened. Then climbed another. Caleb watched carefully. "Easy," he said. Shadow reached the third step and stopped again. This time his head turned slightly toward the ship's interior. Not fear. Awareness. Caleb stepped onto the staircase. The metal groaned under his weight, but held. Each step up felt heavier than the last. Not physically, mentally. Like crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. At the top, a doorway waited. Wide open. No door. Just a dark frame leading inside. Caleb stopped just short of it. The air, changed again. Cooler. Still. And carrying that same faint metallic scent. Stronger now. He listened. Nothing. No movement. No voices. Just the hum, steady. Constant. Coming from somewhere deep within, Shadow stood at the threshold. He didn't go in. He didn't retreat. He waited. Caleb reached down, resting a hand briefly on the dog's back. "You don't like it," he said quietly. Shadow's ears flicked once. Caleb nodded. "Yeah, me neither." He straightened, then stepped inside. The transition was immediate. Outside, the jungle had been heavy and alive, even in its silence. Inside, it was different. Dead air, thick with dust and time. The corridor stretched ahead, long and narrow, lined with doors on either side. The walls were faded, paint peeling in strips, exposing dull metal beneath. Light filtered in through broken windows further down, casting pale, uneven patterns across the floor. Caleb took a slow step forward, then another. His boots echoed, too loud, too sharp. He adjusted his pace instinctively, placing each step more carefully, minimizing sound. Old habits. They came back faster than he expected. Shadow entered behind him, moving low, quiet, his paws making almost no sound at all. Caleb glanced at the nearest door, half open. He nudged it wider with his hand. Inside, a cabin, small, contained, a bed still made, sheets covered in dust but undisturbed. A suitcase rested on a chair, partially open, clothes still folded neatly inside. A pair of shoes sat by the bed, positioned like someone had taken them off at the end of the day, expecting to put them back on in the morning. Caleb's chest tightened. "This isn't right," he whispered. There were no signs of struggle, no panic, no attempt to escape, just absence. He stepped back into the corridor. Further down, another door, closed. He opened it. Another cabin, similar, intact, untouched. Time had stopped here. Not slowly, not naturally. All at once. Shadow moved ahead, nose brushing along the lower edge of the walls, tracing something Caleb couldn't see. Then he stopped. A soft, low whine escaped his throat. Caleb followed his line of sight. The corridor split ahead, two directions, one slightly darker than the other. Shadow refused the darker path. He turned away from it, stepping toward the lighter corridor, but kept glancing back, uneasy. Caleb stared into the darkness. Something about it felt heavier, denser, like the air itself had weight. The hum seemed stronger from that direction. He hesitated, then shook his head. Not yet. He followed Shadow. They moved deeper along the safer path, passing more cabins, more frozen moments of lives interrupted. A child's drawing taped to a wall, a coffee cup still sitting on a small table, a jacket draped over a chair. Each one told the same story. People had been here. Then suddenly, they weren't. Caleb's breathing slowed, his senses sharpening further. This wasn't abandonment. This was containment. And someone had made sure it stayed that way. The hum pulsed again, louder now, closer. Shadow stopped once more, body rigid. Caleb froze beside him. They both listened. For the first time since entering the ship, something answered the silence. A faint metallic sound. Distant. Deep inside the structure. Not random. Not natural. Deliberate. Caleb's eyes hardened. We're not alone. Shadow didn't move. Neither did Caleb. The ship creaked softly around them. The hum continued. And somewhere in the darkness ahead, something was waiting. Caleb didn't move. Neither did Shadow. The corridor stretched out before them, dim and uneven, swallowed in patches of shadow where the broken light couldn't reach. The hum pressed through the metal beneath Caleb's boots, steady and unnatural, like a machine that refused to die. The metallic sound came again. Faint. Measured. Then, nothing. Caleb slowly lowered his center of gravity, his body shifting into something quieter, tighter. Not the drifter anymore. Not the man people whispered about in town. This was something older, something trained. Stay close, he murmured. Shadow didn't need the command. He was already moving, keeping tight to Caleb's left side, head low, ears rotating constantly. They advanced, one step at a time. The air inside the ship felt wrong, too still, too sealed. Every breath carried the taste of dust and metal, dry and heavy in the back of the throat. Caleb passed another open doorway. He paused, looked inside. A dining room, tables arranged in perfect rows, chairs pushed in, utensils still set neatly beside plates that had long since turned dull with dust. Nothing overturned, nothing disturbed. It was like the room had been prepared for guests who never arrived. Caleb stepped in halfway, scanning. A glass sat at the edge of one table, untouched. A folded napkin rested beside it. Everything placed with care. Too much care. This wasn't rushed, he whispered. This was planned. Shadow didn't enter. He remained at the doorway, watching the corridor behind them. Guarding. Caleb stepped back out. They kept moving. Further down, the corridor narrowed. The walls changed subtly, less decorative, more functional. Painted surfaces gave way to exposed panels, wiring conduits, reinforced joints, crew access, or something beyond that. Caleb's fingers brushed lightly against the wall as he passed. Cold. But not dead. There was a faint vibration running through it, pulsing in rhythm with the hum. Still powered. Still active. Who kept you alive? He murmured under his breath. Shadow stopped again. This time his body stiffened hard, not just alert. Ready. Caleb followed his gaze. Ahead, the corridor split again, but this time, one path was blocked by a heavy steel door. The other led deeper and darker. The hum was stronger now, almost directional. Caleb stepped toward the blocked path first. The door was thick, industrial, no handle, only a sealed locking mechanism, rusted around the edges, but still intact. He ran his fingers over it. Not for passengers, he muttered. Shadow let out a low growl. Caleb glanced at him. Yeah. I don't think we're supposed to go that way. He turned, faced the darker corridor. The air there felt heavier, like stepping toward pressure. Shadow didn't like it. He backed half a step, but he didn't retreat. Caleb nodded slowly. We moved together. They advanced. The light faded behind them as they pushed deeper into the ship. Now only faint illumination filtered in through distant openings, leaving most of the hallway wrapped in shadow. Caleb's eyes adjusted. Shapes emerged. Details sharpened. Doors. Pipes running along the ceiling. Old signage, barely readable. Then, something new, markings, scratches along the wall, long, uneven, like someone had dragged something sharp across the surface. Caleb stepped closer, ran his fingers near the grooves. Not recent, but not ancient either. Intentional. Shadow's breathing changed. Faster now, more focused. Caleb moved on. The corridor opened into a wider space, a lounge. Large windows lined one side, most of them cracked or broken, letting in strips of pale daylight. Vines had begun creeping through the openings, reaching inward like fingers. At the far end of the room, a piano, black, dust-covered, still intact. Caleb slowed. Something about it didn't belong. Not just the object itself. The position. Centered. Deliberate. He approached cautiously. Shadow stayed back, watching the edges of the room instead. Caleb reached out. Pressed one key. The sound rang out. Sharp. Clear. Echoing far longer than it should have. It bounced off the walls, traveled down the corridors behind them, carried into the depths of the ship. Then faded. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. Caleb stepped back slowly. That was a mistake, he muttered. Shadow's head snapped toward the hallway they came from. A sound. Soft. Metal on metal. Closer this time. Caleb's pulse spiked. He moved quickly, stepping behind a structural column near the edge of the lounge, pulling Shadow with him. They waited, listening. The sound came again. Footsteps, slow, measured, coming from the corridor. Caleb's breathing slowed, controlled. His body tightened, ready. Shadow's muscles coiled. Seconds stretched. Then, The sound stopped, right at the entrance to the lounge. Caleb didn't move, didn't breathe. Nothing entered. No figure. No shadow. Just silence. Again. Long. Heavy. Then a shift. Subtle. As if whatever had been there turned away. The footsteps resumed, fading, moving deeper into the ship, away from them. Caleb exhaled slowly, tension still locked in his chest. Shadow let out a quiet, controlled breath. Caleb leaned his head back briefly against the cold metal behind him. "Yeah," he whispered. "We're not alone." He glanced toward the direction the footsteps had gone, then back the way they came. Every instinct told him to leave. Right now, get out. Forget this place. But something else pushed back. Stronger. The same feeling that had brought him here. The same pull that Shadow had followed without hesitation. Caleb straightened. "We keep going." Shadow looked at him, then turned, facing deeper into the ship. The hum pulsed again, louder now, calling them forward. And this time, Caleb didn't hesitate. He followed. The corridor swallowed them whole. The light from the lounge behind them faded quickly, replaced by a dim, gray haze that barely defined the walls ahead. The deeper they went, the more the ship changed. The air grew tighter, colder. The smell of dust gave way to something sharper, something chemical. Shadow moved slower now, not cautious, deliberate. Each step measured, nose low, tracking something invisible but undeniable. Caleb stayed close behind, his breathing steady but shallow, every sense stretched thin. The memory of footsteps lingered in his mind, pressing against his focus like a warning he couldn't ignore. "You heard it too," he whispered. Shadow didn't react. But Caleb knew. They both knew. They weren't alone. The corridor narrowed again, turning sharply to the right. As they rounded the corner, Caleb's eyes caught something different. One of the doors wasn't just closed. It was sealed. Not with a lock. With a plate. A thick metal sheet bolted across the frame from the outside. Caleb slowed. "That's new," he muttered. The rest of the doors they'd passed had been untouched, open, forgotten, frozen in time. This one had been intentionally shut. He stepped closer, crouching slightly as he examined the edges. The bolts weren't ancient. Rust had touched them, but not claimed them. Someone had put this here, after everything else had been abandoned. Shadow let out a low, uneasy sound. Not quite a growl, something deeper. Caleb placed his hand against the plate. Cold. But behind it, there was something else. A faint pressure, like the space beyond it had been closed off too tightly. He pulled his hand back. "No," he said quietly. "Not this one." He stood and moved on. Shadow followed immediately, as if relieved. The corridor opened slightly a few steps ahead, revealing a small junction of rooms. Most were empty or in the same untouched condition as before. But one door hung slightly ajar. Shadow stopped in front of it. Caleb's eyes narrowed. "Yeah," he said softly. "I see it." He approached slowly, pushing the door open with 2 fingers. The hinges creaked. Inside, a crew cabin, smaller than the others, more functional. A narrow bed against one wall. A desk bolted to the floor. Storage compartments built directly into the structure. But unlike the others, this room had been used. Recently. Not recently in time. Recently in intent. The dust wasn't even. Some surfaces were disturbed. The bed had been sat on. The desk, touched. Caleb stepped inside. Shadow remained at the doorway, watching the corridor behind them, always guarding. Caleb moved to the desk. A notebook lay there, half covered in dust. but not buried. He picked it up carefully. The cover was worn, the edges curled, but intact. He opened it. The first few pages were blank. Then, writing. Handwritten. Tight. Controlled at first. Spanish. Caleb frowned slightly, flipping a few pages until the writing shifted. English. Broken, but readable. Luis Ortega, Caleb read softly. Galley staff. He kept going. The entries started simple. Schedules, food logs, observations about passengers. Normal. Then they changed. We loaded cargo at night, Caleb read under his breath. Not food, not supplies. Heavy crates, no markings. His jaw tightened. He flipped the page. Crew not allowed near lower deck. Security increased. Officers not talking. Another page. Passengers asking questions. One got sick today. Not normal. Caleb's breathing slowed further, each word pulling him deeper. He turned another page. The handwriting shifted. Less controlled. More pressure. We told it was medicine. It is not. Shadow shifted at the doorway. A soft, warning rumble. Caleb didn't look up. He kept reading. They changed the route. No ports, no communication. We are not stopping. Another page. Ink smeared. Words pressed hard into the paper. They locked access to cargo. Said quarantine. But we are not sick. Caleb's chest tightened. His mind pulled at the pattern. This wasn't chaos. This was control. Planned. Systematic. He turned to the next page and froze. The writing there was different. Shaking. Uneven. Fear pressed into every line. Something is making that noise below. Caleb felt the hum under his boots pulse slightly stronger, as if answering. He swallowed. Kept reading. It does not stop. A long pause in the writing. Then, they told us to stay in rooms. Doors locked from outside. Caleb's fingers tightened on the page. They are not letting us leave. The next line was barely legible. We are not crew anymore. Another page, half torn. Words scratched across the surface. We are part of it now. Caleb closed the notebook slowly. The room felt smaller, tighter, like the walls had shifted inward. Shadow stepped inside suddenly, turning in a slow circle before stopping at the far corner. His nose pressed toward the floor, then the wall. Caleb followed his movement. What is it? Shadow pawed once at the base of the wall. A soft metallic sound echoed behind it. Hollow. Caleb crouched, ran his hand along the lower panel. There. A seam. Barely visible. Hidden. He pressed. Nothing. He pushed harder. Still nothing. Hold on, he muttered. He shifted his grip, applying pressure near the edge. The panel gave, just slightly. Then clicked. It popped open an inch. Caleb pulled it wider. Behind it, a narrow compartment. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, a device. Small, rugged, military grade. Caleb's breath caught. No way. He reached in, pulling it out carefully. A secure data drive. Encrypted. Not civilian. Not commercial. Government. Or worse. Shadow let out a low, urgent growl. Caleb looked at him, then toward the doorway. The corridor beyond was silent. Too silent. Caleb's grip tightened around the drive. This wasn't just a cover, he whispered. Shadow's ears snapped forward, and then, from somewhere deeper in the ship, a sharp metallic clang echoed, louder than before, closer. Caleb stood instantly, all hesitation gone. Shadow moved beside him, ready. The silence returned, but it felt different now. Not empty. Watching. Waiting. And whatever was out there had just heard them. Caleb didn't speak. Didn't move. The data drive sat cold and heavy in his hand, its presence suddenly louder than the hum beneath his feet. Shadow stood frozen at the doorway, body angled outward, every muscle coiled tight. His ears twitched once, twice, locking onto something beyond the corridor. Silence. Then, a faint shift. Not footsteps this time, something lower, closer to the structure itself. Metal settling or something moving through it. Caleb slid the drive into his jacket pocket without breaking eye contact with the hallway. "Time to move," he whispered. Shadow didn't need to be told. They stepped out of the cabin together, Caleb pulling the door gently closed behind them, not to hide but to control the sound. Every movement now mattered. The corridor felt different, tighter, as if the ship itself had become aware of them. The hum pulsed again, stronger. Caleb felt it through his boots, rising through his legs, settling deep in his chest. It wasn't just background noise anymore. It had direction, and now he could tell exactly where it was coming from. Below. Shadow turned immediately, heading toward the deeper corridor, the one they had avoided earlier. The darker one. Caleb followed without hesitation this time. The tension had shifted. They weren't just exploring anymore. They were being drawn. The corridor sloped downward gradually, almost unnoticeable at first, but enough that Caleb's weight shifted forward with each step. The air grew colder as they descended, the metallic scent sharpening until it burned faintly at the back of his throat. "Lower deck," Caleb muttered. Shadow picked up pace. Not reckless, focused, driven. They reached the end of the corridor, and there it was. A door. Not like the others. This one was thick, reinforced. Industrial-grade steel set deep into the frame with a wheel lock mechanism in the center. Faint hazard markings were still visible beneath layers of grime, symbols worn but recognizable. Caleb stepped closer. His eyes scanned the markings. Biohazard. Chemical. Warning labels layered over one another. His jaw tightened. "This is it," he said quietly. Shadow growled. Not fear. Warning. Caleb reached for the wheel, paused. His hand hovered just above it. For a moment, everything else fell away. The jungle, the ship, the silence. All of it replaced by a memory. Heat. Dust. A door just like this one. A command in his ear. Breach. Caleb's fingers curled slightly, then stopped. His breathing faltered. For just a second. He wasn't here anymore. He was back there. Back in the desert. Back in the moment everything went wrong. A voice shouting. Then the blast. Caleb staggered half a step back, eyes snapping open. Not again, he breathed. Shadow moved instantly, pressing against his side, grounding him. Present. Now. Safe. Caleb rested a hand on the dog's neck, gripping lightly. I'm here, he whispered. I'm here. Shadow held steady. Caleb inhaled deeply. Once. Twice. Then looked back at the door. This wasn't that mission. This wasn't his team. But whatever was behind this door, it was the reason this ship existed. The reason people had been locked in. The reason someone was still guarding it. He reached out again. This time his hand didn't shake. He gripped the wheel. Cold metal. Solid. Real. Stay ready, he said. Shadow shifted position, angling himself slightly behind and to the side, out of the direct line. Caleb turned the wheel. It resisted at first, then moved, slow, grinding. The sound echoed down the corridor like a warning. Caleb kept turning. The mechanism groaned as it unlocked, layer by layer, until finally, a deep, hollow click. The door released. Caleb pulled it open. A rush of air hit him immediately, stale, bitter, carrying the sharp sting of something chemical and long-sealed. His eyes narrowed. Inside, darkness, thick and complete. The hum roared louder here, no longer distant. It filled the space. Caleb stepped through. Shadow followed. The beam of light from the corridor barely reached inside, fading quickly into the vast interior beyond. Caleb's eyes adjusted slowly. Shapes began to form. Large, angular, rows of something stretching into the distance. Crates. Dozens of them. No. Hundreds. Stacked in organized lines reaching toward the far end of the cargo hold. Some were intact. Others, broken. Lids cracked open. Edges bent outward. Caleb moved closer to the nearest one, his pulse steady, his breathing controlled. He reached the crate, ran his fingers along the side, markings scratched out, labels removed, but the outline of what had been there remained. He pulled the lid open further. Inside, not supplies, not food, not medicine. Gold. Bars stacked tightly together, dull under the faint light. Caleb stared for a long moment, then exhaled slowly. Jesus! He moved to the next crate, opened it. More. Not gold this time. Metal. Rare earth alloys. Dense, refined, valuable. Another crate. Encrypted hardware units. Military grade. Data storage. Caleb stepped back. The scale of it hit him all at once. This is bigger than smuggling, he whispered. Shadow barked once, sharp. Caleb turned. The dog stood near the far end of the hold, pawing at something along the wall. Caleb moved quickly toward him. What is it? Shadow stepped aside. There. Another panel. Hidden. Similar to the one in the cabin. Caleb knelt, working it open. Inside, a second compartment. Smaller. Sealed tighter. He forced it open. Inside, a secured case. He pulled it out. Opened it. Inside lay a single device. More advanced. More protected. And beneath it, documents, names, numbers, transactions. Caleb's expression hardened as he scanned them. This wasn't just cargo. This was a network, a system, a chain of operations stretching far beyond this ship. He closed the case slowly. His voice dropped. This isn't a fortune, he said. It's proof. Shadow's head snapped toward the entrance. Caleb followed his gaze. The hum shifted. Not louder, different. As if something had changed its rhythm. Then, a sound. Clear. Close. Metal on metal. Right outside the door. Caleb stood instantly. All calm gone. Replaced by something sharper. Focused. Contact, he whispered. Shadow moved into position. Low. Ready. The doorway remained dark. Still. Silent. But Caleb knew. Whoever or whatever was out there was no longer searching. They had found them. Caleb didn't wait. Back, he whispered. Shadow shifted instantly, stepping in tight behind him as Caleb moved laterally, putting a stack of crates between them and the cargo hold entrance. His mind snapped into place. Angles, cover, movement, exit routes. Every inch of the space mapped itself out in seconds. The hum pulsed beneath it all. Steady, watching. The metallic sound came again. Closer now, just outside the door. A shadow stretched across the threshold, then stopped. Caleb's pulse slowed. Not from calm, from control. He crouched lower, one hand gripping the edge of a crate, the other hovering near the sealed case at his side. He didn't need a weapon to know this wasn't random. This was organized, professional. Shadow's breathing was silent, focused. His eyes locked on the doorway. Seconds dragged. Then a voice, low, controlled, not loud enough to echo. Doors open. Another voice answered, "Clear it." Caleb's jaw tightened. Not scavengers, not civilians, trained. He leaned slightly, just enough to catch a glimpse through the narrow gap between crates. Two figures entered the cargo hold. Dark clothing, tactical posture. Their movements were efficient, measured, covering angles, scanning corners, communicating without needing words. Caleb pulled back instantly. "Stay," he mouthed to Shadow. The dog didn't move. The men advanced further into the hold. One moved toward the broken crates. The other angled toward the far side, toward where Caleb had opened the hidden compartment. Too close, too fast. Caleb's mind ran through options. Fight? No. Too open. Too many unknowns. Evade. Always survive first. He leaned close to Shadow. "On me," he whispered. Shadow's ears flicked once. Caleb shifted his weight slowly, inching along the crate line, keeping the stacked cargo between them and the intruders. Every movement was deliberate, controlled, silent. Behind them, the men spoke again. Crates disturbed. A pause. Then, "Someone's here." Caleb didn't stop. He reached the edge of the crate stack and spotted it. A secondary exit. Not a door. A maintenance passage. Half hidden behind structural supports, barely wide enough to squeeze through. He pointed. Shadow moved first, slipping into the narrow space without a sound. Caleb followed, pulling the sealed case tight against his chest as he entered the passage. The air inside was colder, tighter, metal pressed in from both sides. He moved quickly now, but still silent, boots finding each step with precision. Behind them, movement, a shout, then footsteps, faster now, closing in. Caleb didn't look back. "Move," he whispered. Shadow surged forward. The passage twisted sharply, then angled upward. A ladder. Caleb grabbed the rungs, climbing fast, muscles burning but controlled. Shadow leapt, claws catching each rung with practiced ease, staying just below him. Voices echoed from below. "Up there!" Caleb reached the top, pushing against a hatch. Stuck. He braced, pushed harder. The metal groaned, then gave. The hatch burst open. Light spilled in. Caleb pulled himself through, rolling onto a narrow upper deck. Shadow followed immediately. Caleb slammed the hatch shut behind them, twisting the latch into place. Not a lock, but enough to slow them. He stood quickly, scanning. They were higher now, closer to the outer sections of the ship. Broken railings, open sky, vines creeping in from every angle. The jungle visible beyond. Freedom, but not yet. Shadow barked once. Caleb turned. At the far end of the deck, another figure, standing still, watching. Not surprised, not alarmed. Just waiting. Caleb froze. The man didn't move, didn't raise a weapon, didn't speak. He simply stood there, half shadowed by the broken structure around him. Older, calmer, different from the others. Caleb's instincts flared. This one wasn't just security. This was someone in charge. The man tilted his head slightly, studying him. Then his gaze shifted to Shadow. A flicker of recognition passed across his face, then back to Caleb. "You shouldn't have come here," the man said. His voice was steady, certain, like he had said those words before. Caleb didn't answer, didn't move. The sealed case felt heavier in his hands. The man took one slow step forward, That ship, he continued, was never meant to be found. Caleb's grip tightened. Shadow stepped slightly in front of him. Protective. The man's eyes followed the movement, then softened, just slightly. Loyal, he said quietly. Then his tone hardened again. You have something that doesn't belong to you. Caleb finally spoke. It belongs to the people you buried in here. Silence stretched between them. The jungle wind stirred faintly through the broken structure. The man's expression didn't change. Those people, he said, were a liability. Caleb's jaw clenched. Shadow growled low. The man ignored it. You don't understand what you've stepped into, he continued. That, down there, he gestured vaguely toward the lower decks, isn't just money. It's leverage, power, stability. Caleb shook his head once. It's evidence. For the first time. The man smiled, not amused, not friendly, just acknowledging. Yes, he said. Exactly. A beat. Then, that's why you can't leave with it. Behind Caleb, the hatch rattled. The men below were coming, fast. Caleb shifted his stance slightly. Not aggression. Positioning. Shadow mirrored him. Ready. The man watched the movement, then nodded once. Almost respectfully. Walk away, he said. Leave the case. You and the dog can go. Caleb didn't hesitate. No. The word hung in the air. Final. The man's eyes darkened. Behind Caleb, the hatch burst open. Boots hit the deck. Voices shouted. Caleb moved. Not back. Not forward. Sideways, grabbing Shadow's harness and pulling him hard toward the broken edge of the deck. The jungle waited below. 30 feet down. Maybe more. The man's voice cut through the chaos. Don't. Too late. Caleb jumped. Shadow with him. The world dropped away. Air rushed. Branches tore past them. Then, impact. Hard. Rolling. Pain flared through Caleb's shoulder as he hit the ground, momentum carrying him through thick underbrush. Shadow landed beside him, already moving. No hesitation. Caleb pushed himself up, ignoring the pain. Go, he shouted. They ran. Behind them, voices, shouting, movement through the ship. But the jungle swallowed sound, swallowed sight, swallowed everything. Within seconds, they were gone. But Caleb knew this wasn't over, not even close, because what they had found wasn't just a hidden fortune. It was a secret people were willing to protect at any cost. Caleb didn't slow down. Branches tore at his clothes as he pushed deeper into the jungle, boots slipping in mud, lungs burning as the humid air clawed at his chest. Behind him, the towering silhouette of the Aurora Star vanished quickly, swallowed again by vines and shadow, as if it had never existed. Shadow stayed just ahead, guiding, always guiding. But something had changed. His stride wasn't as clean, not as fluid. Caleb noticed it after the third 100 yards. A slight limp, subtle, but there. Shadow, Caleb called, slowing. The dog didn't stop. He kept moving forward, ears alert, body focused. Shadow, stop. This time, the dog paused, turned. His breathing was heavier than it should have been. Caleb dropped to one knee beside him, hands moving quickly over his fur, searching. Then he found it. A shallow cut along Shadow's front leg. Not deep, but fresh, likely from the jump. Caleb exhaled slowly, tension tightening his jaw. You hid that from me, he murmured. Shadow's tail moved once, not proud, not ashamed, just steady. Caleb pulled a strip of cloth from his sleeve, tearing it clean and wrapping the wound with practiced efficiency. Not losing you, he said quietly. Not again. For a moment, the jungle faded, replaced by something else. A memory, another teammate, another moment where he had said the same words. And still, they hadn't made it. Caleb tightened the bandage slightly, then leaned his forehead briefly against Shadow's. I got you this time. Shadow leaned back into him, grounding him, bringing him back. A distant sound echoed faintly through the trees, not close but not far either. Voices, searching. Caleb stood immediately. We keep moving. They pressed on, deeper, further from the ship. The jungle grew denser again, but the tension shifted. The immediate threat faded slightly, replaced by something heavier. What they had found. What it meant. Caleb's hand drifted to his jacket, feeling the weight of the sealed case. Proof. Evidence. Something powerful enough to kill for. His mind worked through it piece by piece. Cargo disguised, crew locked in, armed guards still protecting the site. This wasn't random. This was organized, global. And then, a thought hit him. Hard. He stopped. Shadow turned instantly. What is it? Caleb muttered to himself. His mind rewound. Luis Ortega's journal. The dates. The route change. The lockdown. Caleb's breathing slowed. That timeline, he whispered. It lined up. Too closely. With something else. Something he had spent years trying not to remember. His last mission. Desert. Coordinates classified. Objective unclear. Command shifting mid-operation. Extraction delayed. Then, silence. They had walked into something they weren't meant to see. Something they were never meant to come back from. Caleb staggered half a step, the memory hitting harder now. Mason shouting over comms. Walker, this isn't right. Static. Then gunfire. Then nothing. Caleb shut his eyes tight. No, he whispered. No, that's not. But it was. The pattern matched. The same structure. The same silence. The same disappearance. He looked down at Shadow. You remember, he said quietly. Shadow held his gaze. The dog had been there. Through it all. The only one who came back with him. The only one who knew the truth. Caleb's chest tightened. They weren't just transporting cargo, he said. They were cleaning up loose ends. The jungle around them seemed to grow heavier, darker, as if the truth itself had weight. They buried that ship, Caleb continued, just like they buried my team. Shadow let out a low, quiet sound. Not fear, recognition. Caleb looked back toward where the ship had been. Hidden now. Gone. But still there. They didn't just hide it, he said. They erased it. A new sound broke through the silence. Closer this time. Movement through brush. Caleb's head snapped toward it. Shadow stepped in front of him instantly. Protective. Two figures emerged through the trees. Not the same as before. Different clothing. Less tactical. But still, purposeful. Caleb didn't wait to analyze. Down, he whispered. They dropped low into the undergrowth, disappearing into the thick vegetation just as the figures moved past. Their voices carried faintly. He went this way. Check the perimeter. Caleb's jaw tightened. More of them. This wasn't a small operation. It was layered, organized, and they were spreading out. Shadow's breathing steadied beside him, waiting, listening. The figures moved on. Their footsteps faded. Caleb remained still for a full minute. Then 2. Then finally, he exhaled. They're not going to stop, he said. Shadow looked at him. Caleb's eyes hardened. They can't. He reached into his jacket, pulling out the smaller data drive he had taken earlier. He turned it over in his hand. This is bigger than us, he said quietly. Then he looked at Shadow. But you already knew that. The dog's ears lifted slightly. Caleb gave a small, tired nod. "Yeah," he said. "You always do." He pushed himself back to his feet. Pain flickered through his shoulder from the fall, but he ignored it. There would be time for that later. Maybe. Right now, they needed distance, a plan, and a way to make sure what they found didn't disappear like everything else. Caleb looked ahead, toward where the jungle thinned faintly in the distance, toward the coast. "We head back," he said. "Get out. Then we figure out who still listens." Shadow stepped forward immediately. Ready. Always ready. Caleb followed. But as they moved, he couldn't shake the feeling that the ship wasn't done with them, and whatever had been buried inside it had just come back to life. Caleb felt it before he heard it. That shift in the air, that subtle pressure that came when something was closing in. He slowed. Not stopping, never stopping, but adjusting, listening between his own footsteps, between Shadow's breath, between the distant sounds of the jungle that had finally begun to return. Birds, insects, life. But underneath it, movement. Tracking. Shadow picked it up at the same moment. His ears snapped back. A low growl formed in his throat. Caleb nodded once. "I know." They weren't searching blindly anymore. They had a direction. And now, so did the men behind them. The terrain began to slope downward, the ground growing wetter, softer beneath their feet. The jungle thinned slightly ahead, hinting at lower land, closer to the marsh edges that led back toward the coast. Almost out. But not yet. A branch snapped behind them. Too close. Caleb pivoted instantly, dropping into a crouch, pulling Shadow with him into a dense cluster of low brush. Two figures moved through the trees. Fast, efficient, not talking now. Hunting. Caleb's breathing slowed to almost nothing. Shadow went still, invisible. The men passed within 15 yards, close enough that Caleb could see the tension in their shoulders, the way their eyes scanned the ground, reading signs most people would miss. But they weren't looking for just anyone. They were looking for him. One of them paused, turned slightly. For a moment, Caleb thought he'd been spotted. Then the man shook his head and moved on. The sound of their movement faded again. Caleb didn't move. Not yet. He counted in his head. 10 seconds. 20. 30, then... He exhaled slowly. "They're tightening the net," he whispered. Shadow shifted slightly, eyes still locked in the direction the men had gone. Caleb stood. "We changed direction." He turned sharply, angling away from the coastline, not toward safety, toward confusion. Shadow followed immediately, adjusting without hesitation. They moved faster now, harder. Caleb's shoulder burned with every stride, the impact from the fall catching up with him, but he ignored it. Pain was familiar, manageable. Being caught wasn't. The jungle thickened again, swallowing them in green and shadow. Caleb deliberately chose uneven ground, areas where tracks would break or vanish entirely. Every step calculated, every turn intentional. This wasn't running. This was evasion. Shadow suddenly stopped, hard. Caleb nearly collided with him. "What?" The dog exploded forward. No warning. No hesitation. A blur of muscle and motion. Caleb turned. A figure lunged from behind a tree. Too close. Too fast. Caleb reacted on instinct, shifting his weight just as Shadow hit the man full force, driving him off balance and into the undergrowth. The impact was controlled, precise, just enough to disrupt, not linger. Caleb moved immediately, grabbing Shadow's harness. "Go!" They didn't stay, didn't look back. The jungle swallowed the moment as quickly as it had happened. But the message was clear. They weren't just being followed. They were being cut off. Caleb's breathing deepened as they pushed forward. They knew we'd head for the coast, he muttered. They're hurting us. Shadow's pace didn't falter, but his breathing had changed again. Heavier now, the limp more noticeable. Caleb saw it, felt it, and it hit harder than anything else. They're pushing you too, he said quietly. Shadow didn't respond, didn't slow. Caleb clenched his jaw. All right, he said. We finish this together. The trees ahead began to thin again. This time, not jungle. Light. Open space. Caleb slowed instinctively, dropping his profile as he approached the edge. Beyond the tree line, water. A wide stretch of marshland leading out toward the coastal inlet. They had made it. Almost. Shadow stepped forward, then froze. Caleb followed his gaze. Across the marsh, barely visible through the reeds. Movement. More figures. Positioned. Waiting. Caleb's stomach tightened. They boxed us in, he said. Behind them, the jungle. Ahead, the marsh. And somewhere in between, the men closing in, Shadow let out a low, steady growl. Caleb's eyes scanned the terrain rapidly. There, a narrow wooden structure. Half-rotted. Barely standing. A bridge. Old. Forgotten. Leading across a thinner stretch of water toward higher ground. A risk. A big one. But the only path not already covered. Caleb looked down at Shadow. You trust me? He asked. Shadow didn't hesitate. He stepped forward. Caleb nodded once. Then we move. They broke from cover. Fast. Direct. No hesitation. The marsh grass whipped against Caleb's legs as they sprinted toward the bridge, water splashing beneath each step. Behind them, shouts. They had been seen. Caleb didn't look back. The bridge loomed ahead, its wooden planks warped and broken, sections missing entirely. Shadow reached it first. Without slowing, he leapt, clearing the first gap, landing clean. Caleb followed. The wood creaked under his weight as he crossed, each step a calculated risk. One wrong move and the structure would give way beneath him. Halfway across, a shot cracked through the air behind them. The sound echoed over the water. Caleb flinched instinctively but kept moving. Shadow stumbled, just slightly, then recovered. Caleb's heart slammed. Keep going, he shouted. They reached the far side. Caleb turned immediately, grabbing a loose section of railing and kicking it free. The weakened structure shifted, groaning as it lost its balance. Another section collapsed, then another. Within seconds, half the bridge gave way, dropping into the water below and cutting off the direct path. The men on the other side stopped, held, blocked, for now. Caleb didn't wait to see what they'd do next. He dropped to one knee beside Shadow. Let me see. The dog stood still, breathing hard. Caleb's hands moved quickly. There. A deeper wound now. Blood. Fresh. Caleb's chest tightened. You're still standing, he said quietly. You stubborn son of a... Shadow leaned into him. Steady. Present. Caleb nodded. Yeah, he said. I know. He looked back once. Across the broken bridge, the men were still there. Watching. Not rushing. Not panicking. Just waiting. Like they knew this wasn't over. Caleb stood, helping Shadow up gently. We're not done, he said. Shadow stepped forward. Together. They disappeared into the trees. But Caleb knew. The ship. The men. The truth buried in that jungle. None of it was behind them anymore. It was coming with them. And sooner or later, they'd have to face it again. But not today. Today was about surviving. Caleb moved fast, but not recklessly, weaving through the trees with practiced control. The jungle began to thin the farther they pushed, the dense walls of green giving way to scattered brush and uneven ground that sloped toward the outer edge of the restricted zone. The air shifted, lighter, salt creeping back into it. The coast was close. Shadow kept pace beside him, but the limp was worse now, more pronounced. Each step cost him something. Caleb saw it, felt it, and it twisted something deep in his chest. "Almost there," he said quietly. "Stay with me." Shadow didn't slow, didn't hesitate. He never did. They broke through the final line of trees just as the light opened wide around them. The jungle ended. Ahead lay a stretch of open marshland leading toward a narrow dirt road that cut along the edge of the coastal inlet. Civilization. Not much, but enough. Caleb slowed, scanning. No movement, no vehicles, no watchers. For now. He guided Shadow toward a cluster of broken driftwood near the water's edge and dropped to one knee again. "Let me look at it." Shadow stood still. Caleb carefully unwound the cloth bandage. Blood had soaked through. The wound wasn't deep enough to stop him, but it was enough to slow him, enough to leave a trail. Caleb's jaw tightened. Damn it. He pulled another strip of fabric, tighter this time, wrapping it with more pressure. "We're not getting caught because of this," he muttered. Shadow leaned into him again. Steady, always steady. Caleb finished the wrap and rested his forehead briefly against the dog's. Just a little farther. A distant sound carried across the marsh. Not jungle, not wind. An engine. Faint, but real. Caleb's head snapped up. From the road. He stood slowly, pulling Shadow with him. A pickup truck came into view around the bend. Old, faded paint, moving slow. Caleb's instincts flared immediately. Trap or chance? He stepped back slightly, keeping to the edge of the brush. The truck rolled closer, then slowed, then stopped. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out. Older, weathered, sun-worn skin and steady eyes. Earl Dawson, the fisherman. He looked at Caleb for a long moment, then at Shadow, then back at Caleb. "You went in," Earl said. "Not a question." Caleb didn't answer, didn't move. Earl nodded slowly. "Figured you would." Another pause. Then he gestured toward the truck. "Get in." Caleb's eyes narrowed slightly. "Why?" Earl shrugged once. "Because whatever you found in there, they're not going to let you walk away from it." Caleb studied him, measured, weighed. Then he nodded. "Move," he said to Shadow. They crossed the marsh quickly, climbing into the back of the truck. Earl didn't wait. The engine turned. The truck rolled forward. Only then did Caleb allow himself to sit. His body sagged slightly against the side panel, adrenaline fading, pain settling in. Earl glanced at him through the rearview mirror. "You bring something out with you?" he asked. Caleb didn't respond right away. His hand moved to his jacket. Feeling the case, still there, still real. "Yeah," he said finally. Earl nodded again. "Then you didn't just find something," he said. "You found trouble." The truck picked up speed, moving along the narrow road as the jungle faded behind them. But Caleb didn't relax. His eyes stayed on the horizon. Watching. Thinking. "They were still there," he said quietly. Earl's grip tightened slightly on the wheel. "I know." Caleb looked up. "You knew." Earl didn't answer immediately. The road stretched ahead, empty and quiet. Then, "I've lived here a long time," Earl said. "Long enough to know when something doesn't belong. And long enough to know when people start disappearing for asking the wrong questions." Caleb leaned forward slightly. You ever go in? Earl shook his head. Not that far. A beat. But I've seen enough to know. Whatever's out there, it's been there a long time. And it ain't abandoned. Caleb leaned back again. The confirmation didn't surprise him, but it settled something, made it real. Shadow shifted beside him, resting his head briefly against Caleb's leg. Exhaustion. Pain. But still alert. Still present. Caleb rested a hand on his neck. You did good, he said softly. Shadow's tail moved once. The truck continued down the road, leaving the jungle behind. But Caleb knew distance didn't mean safety, not with something like this. They're going to come for it, he said. Earl didn't ask what it was. He just nodded. Then you better decide what you're going to do with it before they find you. Caleb's eyes hardened. He already knew. They buried people in that ship, he said. Left them there to disappear. Earl said nothing. Caleb looked out toward the water. The sun was beginning to dip lower now, casting long shadows across the marsh. They did the same thing to my team, he added quietly. Earl glanced back at him. This time there was something different in his expression. Not curiosity. Understanding. Caleb reached into his jacket and pulled out the smaller data drive, turned it in his hand. This ends it, he said. Earl nodded once. Then you better make sure it gets somewhere they can't bury it again. The truck rolled into the edge of town as the last light of day began to fade. Quiet streets. Few people. Normal life. So far removed from what lay behind them. Caleb stepped out of the truck slowly, helping Shadow down beside him. The dog landed carefully, favoring his leg, but still standing strong. Earl shut off the engine. Where are you going? He asked. Caleb looked down the street, at the small cluster of buildings, the diner, the gas station, the old newspaper office that hadn't printed anything in years. Then beyond that, something else. A path forward. Somewhere someone still listens, Caleb said. Earl gave a small nod. Not many left, he said. Caleb didn't respond. He didn't need many. Just one. He adjusted his grip on the case. Shadow stepped forward, and together, they walked into the fading light, knowing the real fight had just begun. The town didn't notice them. That was the strange part. After everything, after the jungle, the ship, the men hunting them, life here moved like nothing had changed. A couple walked out of the diner laughing. A pickup idled at the gas station. Somewhere, a radio played soft country music into the evening air. Caleb stood on the edge of it all, still half inside the world he had just escaped. Shadow leaned slightly against his leg, grounding him, keeping him here. Stay with me, Caleb murmured, more to himself than the dog. He scanned the street again. He didn't need attention. He needed one thing, a way to make sure the truth didn't disappear. His eyes settled on a building at the far end of the block. Old brick. Faded sign barely hanging above the door. Price Media. Caleb exhaled slowly. That'll do. They crossed the street. Each step felt heavier than it should have. Not from exhaustion, from weight. The case, the truth inside it. The people who would come for it. He reached the door and paused. For a brief second, doubt crept in. What if this changed nothing? What if it just made him a target? What if Shadow nudged his hand? Caleb looked down. The dog's eyes were steady, unshaken. Caleb nodded once. Yeah, he said. We don't walk away from it. He opened the door. A bell rang softly overhead. Inside, the air smelled of paper and old wood. The space was small. Desks, stacks of files, a couple of outdated monitors humming quietly in the corner. And behind one of those desks, a woman looked up, Mid-30s, sharp eyes, tired but alert. Megan Price. She studied Caleb for a moment, taking in the worn clothes, the dirt, the tension in his posture. Then her gaze dropped to Shadow. Recognition flickered. Not of the dog, of what the dog meant. "You look like you've been somewhere you shouldn't be," she said. Caleb didn't sit, didn't relax. "I need someone who still publishes truth," he said. Megan leaned back slightly. "That depends," she replied. "You got something worth publishing?" Caleb reached into his jacket, pulled out the sealed case, set it on the desk between them. The sound it made was quiet, but final. Megan's eyes shifted to it, then back to him. "What is it?" she asked. Caleb met her gaze. "Something people are willing to kill to keep hidden." Silence filled the room, heavy, measured. Megan didn't reach for the case immediately. Instead, she studied him again. Longer this time. "Who are you?" she asked. Caleb hesitated. "Then someone who already lost everything once," he said, not letting it happen again. Shadow stepped forward slightly, positioning himself beside Caleb's leg. Protective. Megan noticed. Then finally, she reached out, opened the case. Inside, the device, the documents, the names, the numbers. Her expression changed instantly. Curiosity, gone, replaced by something sharper. Recognition, concern. She flipped through the pages quickly, her movements becoming faster, more focused. "Where did you get this?" she asked. Caleb didn't answer right away. "From a place that doesn't exist," he said. Megan looked up sharply. "Explain." Caleb took a breath, then told her. Not everything. Not the parts that would break him open. But enough. The ship, the cargo, the crew, the men still guarding it. Megan didn't interrupt, didn't question. She just listened, and when he finished, the room felt different, like the weight had shifted from one person to another. "This," she said slowly, tapping the documents. "This is bigger than local. This is federal, maybe international." Caleb nodded. "I know." Megan closed the case carefully. "You realize what happens if this gets out?" she asked. "Yeah," Caleb said. "They come for whoever has it." Megan held his gaze. "And you just handed it to me." Caleb didn't blink. "You said you still publish truth." A long silence stretched between them. Then, Megan exhaled. "Yeah," she said. "I do." She stood, moving quickly now, gathering equipment, plugging in drives, pulling files onto her system. "This doesn't go through normal channels," she said. "If this is real and it looks real, we don't give them time to bury it." Caleb stepped back slightly, giving her space. "What do you need from me?" he asked. Megan shook her head. "Nothing," she said. "You've done enough." Shadow shifted beside him. Caleb looked down, then back at her. "They'll come here," he said. Megan didn't stop working. "I know. You should move." She paused, looked at him, then shook her head again. "No," she said. "This is exactly where I need to be." Caleb studied her, then gave a small nod. "All right." Minutes passed. Files transferred. Systems hummed. Megan's fingers moved faster than before. Her focus absolute. Then, she stopped, looked at the screen, then at Caleb. "It's live," she said. Caleb didn't react immediately. "Where?" he asked. "Everywhere that matters," she replied. A beat. Then, "We just made some very powerful people very nervous." Outside. A car passed slowly. Too slowly. Caleb's eyes shifted toward the window. Shadow's ears lifted. The moment hung. Then, the car moved on, but the tension stayed. Caleb stepped back toward the door. "They know," he said. Megan didn't argue. She just nodded once. "They always do." Caleb reached for the handle, paused, then looked back at her. "You get it out?" he asked. She met his gaze. "It's not going anywhere." Caleb nodded. "Good." He opened the door. The evening air hit him again, cooler now, darker. Shadow stepped out beside him. Caleb didn't look back. Didn't wait. He walked. Down the street. Into the shadows between the lights. Because he knew this wasn't over. But for the first time, the truth wasn't buried anymore. And somewhere, that mattered. The town slept. Lights dimmed one by one, windows darkening as night settled in like a slow tide. The same streets that had felt ordinary just hours ago now carried something heavier beneath the surface, something unseen but no longer hidden. Caleb walked until the buildings thinned, past the last streetlight, past the edge of town, until the quiet returned. Shadow stayed beside him, his limp slower now, but still there, a reminder of everything they had just survived. They reached the lake just before midnight. Still water stretched out before them, reflecting the sky like glass. No wind, no sound, just silence. Real silence this time, not the kind that watches, the kind that lets you breathe. Caleb lowered himself onto the old wooden dock, the boards creaking softly beneath his weight. Shadow followed, settling down beside him with a slow exhale. For a long time, neither of them moved. Caleb stared out across the water. His reflection stared back. Tired. Worn. But different. Something had shifted. The weight he had carried for years. The questions, the silence, the unfinished story of his team. It wasn't gone. But it wasn't buried anymore. "You remember them," Caleb said quietly. Shadow's ears twitched. Caleb reached down, resting his hand against the dog's neck. "Mason," he said. "Garcia. Holt." The names felt strange on his tongue, like something he hadn't allowed himself to say in a long time. "They didn't disappear," he continued. "They were erased." The lake remained still. But something inside Caleb moved. A slow release. "They walked into something they weren't meant to see," he said. "Same as us." Shadow lifted his head slightly, watching him. Caleb nodded once. "Difference is, we walked back out." He exhaled slowly. The night air felt cleaner here, lighter. Somewhere far off, a distant engine echoed faintly across the water. Boats, maybe. Life continuing. Normal. For everyone else. Caleb looked down at Shadow again. "You brought me there," he said. Shadow didn't react. Didn't need to. Caleb's hand tightened slightly in his fur. "You knew." A pause. Then, "You remembered." The dog leaned into him, and for the first time Caleb understood. Shadow hadn't just followed instinct. He hadn't just reacted. He had carried something. A memory. A connection. Something buried just as deep as Caleb's own past. And when the time came, he had refused to forget. Caleb let out a quiet breath. "Guess I needed that," he said. Shadow's tail moved once. Simple. Certain. Caleb leaned back slightly, bracing his arms behind him as he looked out over the lake again. Somewhere out there. Beyond the trees. Beyond the water. Beyond the maps. The Aurora star still existed. Hidden. Silent. Waiting. But not invisible anymore. Not forgotten. "They'll try to bury it again," Caleb said. Shadow's ears lifted slightly. Caleb nodded. Maybe they already have. A soft breeze moved across the water, breaking the surface just enough to distort the reflection. Caleb watched it for a moment, then shook his head. Doesn't matter. He looked down at Shadow. We didn't let it stay buried. The dog's breathing had slowed now, steady, calm. The tension that had driven him through the jungle, through the ship, through the escape, it was fading. But not his focus, not his loyalty. Never that. Caleb stood slowly, offering a hand down. Come on, he said. Shadow pushed himself up, favoring his leg but steady. Together they stepped off the dock, back onto solid ground. Behind them, the lake returned to stillness. Ahead of them, the road stretched into darkness, uncertain, open. But for the first time in years, Caleb wasn't running from something. He was walking towards something. Not orders, not missions, not ghosts. Truth. He paused once more, glancing back over his shoulder. Just once. Then turned forward again. Shadow stepped ahead. Leading. Always leading. And Caleb followed. Not as a soldier, not as a man lost in silence, but as someone who had carried something through the darkness and brought it back into the light. The jungle still held its secrets. The ship still waited somewhere beyond the reach of maps. But the silence had been broken, and it would never be the same again. Type 1 if you believe the truth always finds a way, or 0 if you think some secrets should stay buried. And if stories about courage, loyalty, and standing your ground mean something to you, go ahead and subscribe. There's more waiting down the road.